stuck, spinning, killed. Let's take a look at 3 brutal cases where experienced cavers were pushed past their limits. Not by panic or poor planning, but by the raw, merciless power of the underground. As always, viewer discretion is strongly advised. Deep beneath the mountains of Oaxaca, Mexico lies one of the most dangerous cave systems on Earth, Chevé Cave. A place of total darkness, deafening water, and vertical drops so long they swallow light. It's not just a cave, it's a labyrinth of death. This is the story of a fatal fall, of misjudged rigging, spinning descent, and death in one of the deepest cave systems ever explored. This is what happens when you go too deep, and don't come back. Chevé Cave doesn't look like much from the surface. Just a crack in the jungle floor, buried in the mountains of Oaxaca, Mexico. But drop inside and it's a whole different world. We're talking about one of the deepest and most dangerous cave systems ever explored. Over 1,500 meters of vertical potential. That's more than a mile straight down, through black pits, flooded tunnels, and rope drops that never seem to end. This isn't a walk through the woods cave. Chevé is vertical, wet, and relentless. One slip, and you're done. By 1991, cavers had mapped out huge chunks of the system, enough to know it was bad news. Long vertical shafts, waterlogged crawls, tight squeezes followed by 20-meter free falls into echoing darkness. To go deeper, teams had to rig every drop manually. That meant setting up bolts in rock, fixing rope, testing gear, all while soaked, freezing, and sometimes dangling 100 feet above a jagged floor. That year, an American expedition was pushing for a new record. They had the gear, they had the experience, they had the route. But Chevé didn't care. It only takes one mistake down there. One failed clip, 1 second of bad rigging, one drop that you don't come back from. By the time the team reached the 23-meter drop, they were already deep inside Chevé, hours underground. Everything they'd passed to get here had been rigged with ropes, bolts, and careful planning. One section at a time. At this stage in the cave, the team was working efficiently. They had descended several vertical pitches already, navigating cramped spaces and drop-offs that could only be accessed using single rope technique, SRT. The fatal drop, the one where everything went wrong, was about 23 meters. That's roughly 75 feet straight down, into a narrow, wet chamber. It wasn't the deepest drop in the system, but it was technical. This drop had been rigged by a member of the advanced team using a fixed rope and rappel rack setup, the standard at the time. On this drop, the rigging was reported to be solid. The rope was fixed, the anchor was good. The team ahead had used it successfully, but what comes next is where things broke down. And fast. Chris Yeager was next in line to descend. He'd been working with the expedition that season and was a competent caver. He clipped into the rope using his rappel rack and leaned back to begin the descent. Everything looked normal at first, but within seconds something was off. His descent wasn't steady, it was spinning. That can happen in vertical caving. The rope twists. Your weight rotates you slowly as you go down. But this wasn't just a mild spin. This was rapid, uncontrolled. Then came the sound. A sudden clatter, then a thud. Something metal had come loose. Moments later, silence. Yeager had fallen. He hadn't made it to the bottom by rope. He'd hit the floor, a shallow pool of water surrounded by hard rock. The rappel rack had detached mid-descent. Whether it was improperly threaded, clipped in wrong, or came undone due to the spinning, no one could say for sure. But the result was brutal. From above, his teammates knew instantly something was wrong. A body doesn't make that kind of impact without being heard. They scrambled down as fast and safely as they could, one by one using the same rope system, now checked and double-checked. When they reached him, Yeager was lying in the pool, face up, motionless. His leg was visibly broken, he wasn't breathing, he had no pulse. And they were in a pitch-black chamber 23 meters underground, with water echoing around them and no way to call the surface. They started CPR immediately. They had to work fast because the chamber was cold, wet, and small. Barely enough space for 3 people to maneuver around a collapsed body. Yeager's chest rose and fell under compression. His face was pale. He wasn't moving. They switched off every few minutes, rotating CPR duties to keep going without collapsing themselves. They kept at it for 30 minutes, still no pulse, no breath, no response. Eventually, someone called it. He was gone. It was a hard thing to say and even harder to accept. But at that depth, with no vitals and no progress after a sustained CPR effort, the reality hit. There was no bringing him back. And worse, There was no safe way to bring his body out. Chevé isn't a walk-up-and-carry-out cave. It's vertical, tight, rope-intensive. Trying to haul a limp, unresponsive body up multiple 20 to 30 meter pitches could have gotten someone else killed. The team didn't have the manpower, the pulley systems, or the time. They made the decision to leave the body behind, but not casually. Yeager's remains were carefully moved out of the main water flow into a protected alcove in the same chamber. They positioned him respectfully out of the way of falling water and secured the area to reduce contamination or disturbance from future teams. Following the incident, Chevé Cave was temporarily shut down for exploration at that depth. Future expeditions would revisit the site, but always with increased caution and always with the memory of what had happened in that cold, wet chamber, 23 meters below the surface of the Earth. A reminder, in caves like this, even when you're not stuck or trapped, you're never truly safe. And we just covered one of the deadliest descents in caving history. But not every fatal mistake happens a mile underground. Sometimes all it takes is 12 feet. This next case happened in Derbyshire, England, inside a wet, claustrophobic cave system known as Merlins Mine. It doesn't look like much from the outside, and just a muddy entrance carved into limestone, tucked into the hills. But once you're inside, it's a different world. The walls close in, the air turns cold, and before long, you're crawling on your stomach through half-flooded stone channels, dragging your gear through gravel and water. Merlins isn't famous for its beauty. It's famous for how unforgiving it is. Narrow, flooded passages twist unpredictably. The ceilings drop low with no warning. Visibility drops to nothing in an instant. And tucked deep inside its network lies the danger most cavers dread the most. A sump. A fully submerged tunnel. Pitch black, silt-filled, and only just wide enough to squeeze through. In the early 1970s, the UK caving scene was pushing into territory few had mapped. Conditions were brutal. But the drive to reach unexplored sections of these caves overruled everything. That's where the Pegasus Caving Club came in. They were one of the most active groups in the region, known for their methodical approach and their willingness to go where others wouldn't. And among their team was a skilled, experienced caver named John Shag Smith. It was summer 1974. The plan was to return to Merlin's Mine and tackle the sump that had stopped progress weeks earlier. The idea was to build a dam just upstream of the sump, divert the flow, and lower the water level enough to crawl through dry. But before construction started, Smith made a call. He wanted to take a look. The sump wasn't long, maybe 12 to 15 feet, and if there was an air pocket beyond it, even a small one, it could change everything. Just a short dive, in and out, nothing reckless. The rest of the team prepped the gear. A tethered rope was clipped to Smith's harness. That was the lifeline, his only link to the surface. They agreed on the standard signal system. If he reached airspace, he'd give the rope 3 sharp tugs. Then, assuming conditions were right, he'd back out and they'd regroup. The sump mouth was tight, barely wide enough to admit a caver in full gear. The water inside was cold and still, but the silt beneath it was waiting. One wrong move and visibility would vanish. There was no chance of turning around inside. Once in, the only direction was forward or back, with stone on all sides and just inches to maneuver. Smith checked his setup, secured his line, and slipped beneath the surface. Above him, the rope pulled taut, held steady by the team. Seconds passed, then the signal came. 3 tugs. He'd found airspace, and then nothing. At first, no one panicked. 3 tugs. That was the agreed signal. He'd made it through, found airspace. Everything seemed normal, routine even. But after that signal, came silence. No return tugs, no pull on the line, just stillness. The team waited, watching the rope. It lay slack, unmoving, as if it were tied to stone. One of them gave it a gentle pull. Nothing came back. Seconds turned into minutes. The realization began to set in. Something was wrong. They didn't waste time. A second diver, one of Smith's teammates, geared up fast. Same entry point, same lifeline. But now the water was worse. Smith's movement through the sump had disturbed the silt. What had been murky was now pitch black. The visibility dropped to near zero the moment the second diver submerged. No light could cut it. Everything turned to liquid shadow. 12 feet. That's all they expected. Just 12 feet. A few kicks forward, crawling through a rock channel barely wider than a person's shoulders. And then, there he was. Smith's body was just past the midpoint, wedged gently against the far side of the sump. He was upright, arms forward, still wearing his mask. His regulator was still in place, mouthpiece sealed. There were no frantic claw marks on the rock, no torn gear, no signs of panic or struggle. It looked like he just stopped moving. The diver reached for him carefully because any sudden disturbance would turn the water into total blackness again. They checked. No breathing, no response, no pulse. He was gone. The entire dive had lasted less than a minute. What happened in those seconds? Nobody knew. Theories swirled later. Some said he might have been stunned and spinning, hitting his head in the low ceiling of the airspace. Others guessed a blackout, maybe even a sudden medical episode. But in that moment, underwater, in zero visibility, there was no room for theories. Only the task. Recover the body. It wasn't easy. The sump wasn't wide enough for two people side by side. Maneuvering was tight. They had to backtrack slowly, guiding Smith's body out of the choke point, all while avoiding kicks that would disturb the sediment. When they finally emerged into the air-filled chamber just before the sump entrance, the team moved in. They carried Smith's body a few meters back to a small, dry area, away from the water, away from the current. A spot sheltered enough to hold him, at least temporarily. There were no cries, no panic, just quiet. It wasn't a rescue anymore, it was a recovery. A final chapter no one had prepared for. The scene froze in time. 1 minute, they were preparing for further exploration. Minutes later, one of the most experienced cavers in the group was dead, without a splash, without a warning. The dive had taken less than 60 seconds, that's all it took. No collapse, no equipment failure, no monsters in the dark, just a flooded tunnel 12 feet long and silence. Tucked away in the rugged hills of the Yorkshire Dales, Long Churn Cave doesn't look like much from the surface. A quiet little crack in the earth surrounded by rolling green fields. It's a favorite entry point for novice and experienced cavers. But don't let the peaceful setting fool you. What lies beneath is a twisting, unpredictable network of stone, water, and darkness that's caught more than one explorer off guard. Long Churn is located near the village of Sellside, close to the famous alum pot system, one of the deepest vertical shafts in England. Long Churn itself is often used as a feeder route into alum pot. The connection gives cavers access to dramatic drops, tight squeezes, and rushing water flows that run through the limestone like veins. It's a playground for thrill seekers, and a trap when the weather turns. The cave is divided into two main sections, Upper Long Churn and Lower Long Churn. Upper Long Churn is relatively friendly, wide in places with a shallow stream cutting through the limestone floor. Many beginner caving trips start here, navigating shallow pools and light scrambling. But Lower Long Churn is another story. Once you pass the squeeze point known as Dr. Bannister's hand basin, the cave gets tighter, wetter, and louder. The stream deepens and narrows, and footing becomes unstable. This is where many underestimate what's ahead. One of the most notorious features is the cheese press, a slim, horizontal crack just above the stream level. You don't crawl through it, you slither. Your helmet scrapes the top, your chest compresses against the rock, and water sometimes flows inches from your face. For many, it's the most claustrophobic part of the route. Even experienced cavers report panic or hesitation in this section, especially if conditions are poor. Further in, Dam Pool is another danger zone, a deeper plunge pool where the stream can collect and surge during heavy rainfall. The cave doesn't just get wetter when it rains, it transforms. Because Long Churn is an active stream cave, it's highly sensitive to surface weather. Rainfall doesn't take days to reach the passages. It can flood in within minutes. Water levels can rise rapidly, turning walkable sections into chest-deep torrents. Narrow crawlways become underwater squeezes. Echoes get louder, visibility drops, and currents strengthen enough to sweep people off their feet. There's no warning system down there, no lights, no exit here sign, just rock, water, and the sound of your own breathing bouncing off the walls. Once inside, your only safety net is how fast you can read the cave and react to changes. And it's this combination, the deceptive ease of access, the connection to a massive system like alum pot, and the cave's volatile reaction to rainfall, that makes Long Churn particularly dangerous. People underestimate it. They think it's a beginner cave, but once you hit Lower Long Churn, one mistake or one change in weather can put you in serious trouble. And in December 2007, that's exactly what happened. Two engineers, Stuart Goodwill and Caroline Fletcher, entered Long Churn under cloudy skies. They had the gear, they had the experience, but they were walking into a system on the edge, and they didn't know it yet. It was a cold December day in 2007 when Stuart Goodwill and Caroline Fletcher arrived in the Yorkshire Dales, kitted out and ready for a midwinter caving run. Both were professional engineers. Stewart, in particular, was an experienced caver. Caroline was newer to the sport, but not a complete novice. That day, the weather was gloomy. Not pouring rain, not yet, but the sky was heavy with moisture and the ground was already saturated from days of wet conditions. If there was concern, it didn't stop them. Stewart knew Long Churn. He'd been in before. The plan was a relatively short descent, nothing too deep, nothing too extreme. In and out. Both wore standard caving gear, full-body wetsuits layered under overalls, helmets with mounted headlamps, knee pads, gloves. Stewart carried a rope and pack with essentials: slings, carabiners, first aid, a spare light. Caroline wore similar gear. By all accounts, they were prepared for a normal day underground, but underground doesn't care about normal, especially not in Long Churn. Their entry point was Upper Long Churn, just a short hike from the roadside lay-by. From there, they passed into the familiar darkness, a dripping tunnel of limestone, slick with algae and echoing with the distant trickle of the stream. This section is relatively forgiving. Pools are shallow, ceilings are high enough to stand. It's the kind of cave that gives a false sense of security, especially to those who've been through it before. Deeper in, they pass Dr. Bannister's hand basin, a key point that marks the transition into Lower Long Churn. It's here the cave begins to tighten. The stream that lazily weaves through the upper section starts gaining strength. In wetter months, it gets faster, louder, and that's exactly what was happening now. There were early signs, and subtle but present. Water levels were slightly elevated. The stream wasn't lapping gently anymore, it was flowing, fast. Echoes carried further. The air inside the cave was heavier, damper, but to experienced eyes it may have still seemed manageable. Down below, the notorious cheese press waited, a narrow, horizontal squeeze barely wide enough for a body to slide through. It's not technically difficult, but it's tight and unnerving. Most cavers exit the cheese press soaked, scraped, and disoriented. And when water's running high, it becomes a whole different beast. As they pushed further, the clock was ticking. On the surface, the weather had started to shift. Rain was falling, light at first, but steady. And in caves like Long Churn, even a little surface water can change everything underground. Stewart and Caroline were deep into Lower Long Churn now, working their way along the stream passage. The noise had picked up. Visibility was dropping. In narrow spaces, sound gets disorienting. Water echoes off the rock, masking voices and movement. Communication becomes difficult, and orientation suffers. Your headlamp cuts through mist, but not much more. At this point, they would have realized things were turning. The stream wasn't just active, and it was rising. Fast. Every step forward meant deeper water, colder air, and less margin for error. Whatever goal they had, whether to explore further or simply complete a loop, now shifted to something more urgent: getting out. But Long Churn doesn't make exits easy, especially when it's flooding. What started as a short winter expedition was about to become a fight against the cave itself, a twisting, flooding maze with no clear way back, and time was already running out. What began as a manageable winter descent had turned lethal. On the surface, rainfall had intensified, and in stream caves like Long Churn, that water doesn't take long to make its way down. It seeps through cracks, channels, and fissures, all funneling into the same narrow underground system. The change wasn't gradual, it was sudden. The shallow stream that trickled through the limestone floor earlier in the day had become a rushing torrent, carrying silt, debris, and cold water through the tight passageways. Flow rate increased rapidly. Pools they had waded through on the way in were now waist deep or more. The sound of moving water had become deafening, bouncing violently off the cave walls and creating an overwhelming echo chamber. Stewart and Caroline were deep in Lower Long Churn, near the cheese press, when they realized the situation was deteriorating fast. They had two choices: shelter in place and wait it out, or attempt a rapid exit before conditions worsened. They chose to move. It was a reasonable decision. This section of the cave isn't especially long. Many groups make the circuit in under an hour, but in rising floodwater, every feature becomes a hazard. Slippery inclines become slides. Narrow passages become choke points. Air pockets shrink, and fast-moving water isn't just uncomfortable, it's powerful enough to knock you off your feet. As they began their retreat, the pair worked against the flow, trying to reverse course through water that was now pushing against them with full force. The walls closed in tighter. In places like the cheese press and Dr. Bannister's hand basin, water can back up, creating hydraulic pressure that traps anything trying to pass through. At some point during the retreat, possibly near a section where the stream narrows sharply, Stuart and Caroline became entangled in ropes. Whether it was leftover rigging from an earlier descent or gear they were carrying, the rushing water wrapped it around them like vines. Rope in a flooding cave doesn't just trip you, it binds, snags, drags. And once you're caught, even trained cavers have little chance of escape. The water was now fully in control. With the current too strong and the passage too tight to maneuver, they were swept downstream, likely in a section where the cave floor drops, forming sudden chutes or slide-like channels. In flooded conditions, these features become deadly. They funnel water and anything in it into confined, turbulent spaces. Search and rescue teams would later find both cavers in about a meter of water, entangled and lifeless. Autopsies confirmed they had drowned. Stuart Goodwill's actions were later acknowledged by the coroner, who concluded that he had made what appeared to be the right decision given the circumstances. But underground, even the right call can turn fatal in seconds. In a cave like Churn, rising water doesn't just challenge your gear or fitness. It transforms the environment. Floors become rivers. Exits vanish, and every second counts. Stuart and Caroline didn't make any glaring mistakes. They had the equipment. They had the experience. But caves like this don't forgive timing, and they were already too deep when the cave decided to change. Their final moments weren't about poor planning or panic. They were about being caught in the wrong part of the system when nature flipped the switch. The cave filled. The current claimed control, and there was no way out. By early evening, a team from the cave rescue organization CRO was mobilized. Based in the Yorkshire Dales, the CRO is made up of experienced local cavers trained specifically for emergencies like this, navigating difficult terrain in real caves, often in lethal conditions, and often at night. This wasn't a drill, and it wasn't going to be easy. Conditions underground were still deteriorating. Rainfall had continued through the evening, and Churn, already a reactive cave, was now running at full flood. Water had swallowed sections of the passage that are normally walkable. Visibility was low. The current was brutal. The rescue team geared up with dry suits, stretchers, radios, floodlights, and rigging gear. Then they entered the cave. Navigating the now treacherous route, the team battled strong water flow through the entrance series and made their way toward the lower Churn passages. It took time. Every step had to be calculated. Loose rocks, flooded rifts, and confined passageways meant the rescuers had to physically wedge themselves through sections where the water could sweep them off their feet. Hours into the operation, search teams reached a deeper stretch downstream and made a grim discovery. Both Stuart and Caroline were found entangled in rope, lying partially submerged in roughly a meter of cold, fast-moving water. There were no signs of life. They had drowned, likely during the earlier attempt to escape the cave as floodwaters surged through the system. Despite the difficulty, the team managed to recover both bodies. It was a physically intense and technically demanding extraction. Even without the weight of a rescue, that section of the cave was already risky. With casualties, the complexity multiplies. It required stretcher work, rigging, and physical maneuvering through tight squeezes, all while water surged around them. The cave rescue organization issued statements afterward, making it clear the conditions that day were severe. The cave had responded violently to ongoing rain, and there was likely no safe path out once the flooding began in earnest. This wasn't a rescue that arrived too late. It was a situation that turned deadly with no warning. And in caves like Churn, once that water rises, time stops being your ally. Following the recovery, the case was handed to the North Yorkshire Coroner's Office. An inquest was launched to establish what happened inside Churn Cave that led to the deaths of Stuart Goodwill and Caroline Fletcher, both experienced engineers and capable cavers. The coroner made it clear that there was no evidence of recklessness or negligence. The gear was appropriate. Their entry into the cave was legal and routine. The conditions, while wet, were not immediately alarming at the time of descent. The pair had acted rationally, attempting to exit once they realized water levels were rising. But the cave's rapid response to heavy rainfall had outpaced their ability to retreat. In particular, it was noted that Stuart made what appeared to be a logical decision under extreme circumstances, to move forward toward the exit rather than stay put and risk worsening conditions. Tragically, the water was already too strong, and both cavers were swept away. The inquest didn't assign blame. Instead, it highlighted the brutal unpredictability of nature underground. The deaths sent a wave through both the local and national caving communities. Stuart and Caroline were not reckless explorers. They were engineers, trained problem solvers, respected for their thoughtful approach to adventure. Their story was a wake-up call, not just about the risks of caving, but about the thin margin between routine and deadly and water-sensitive cave systems. Stuart and Caroline's story became more than a tragedy. It became a cautionary benchmark, a reminder that even the most experienced adventurers can be overwhelmed by a system that looks calm on entry, but transforms without warning. Their loss helped shape better education, more cautious planning, and renewed respect for the silent threat water poses underground. If there's one lesson from this video, it's this: respect the cave and check the sky. Know the cave's structure, watch the weather, and always leave room for the unexpected. Thank you for watching. If these stories caught your attention, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell for more intense real-life accounts of disaster and survival. Tell us in the comments, which story stayed with you the most? Have you ever stepped into a cave yourself? Share your experience with us.